Welcome to Nebraskanomics, where we help Nebraskans remove barriers to opportunity with policy research and legislative advice. I'm your host, Jim Vocal, CEO of the Platte Institute, a Nebraska-based think tank promoting policies that make it easier to get a good job, start a business, and help Nebraskans keep more of what they earn. If you want more economic freedom in Nebraska, then let's get started. In Nebraska, September may become known as the month the whole state works out its issues with local property taxes. That's because every September, starting in 2022, Nebraska cities, counties, school districts, and community colleges will be subject to a property tax transparency requirement known as Truth in Taxation. This process will inform taxpayers like you about proposed property tax increases in your area and give you the tools to express your concerns. And stay tuned until the end of our program to find a free way we can equip you to keep local property taxes in check. My guest today helps Nebraskans make financially savvy tax decisions for a living. He's also an elected official who serves on one of many local boards that levy property taxes. Patrick Bonnett is the president and CEO of Encore Financial Services and also a member of the Papio, Missouri River Natural Resources District Board. We're going to get his advice on how you can use the truth in taxation process to help protect your household or business finances. Patrick, welcome to Nebraskanomics.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to join you today.
Part of the reason the truth in taxation law was created in Nebraska is that there's an honesty gap in the way officials discuss local property taxes. Patrick, can you help explain why property taxes can be increased even if local boards don't raise tax rates?
I sure can. And there's really two issues here. Aside from the first issue, where the boards can increase the tax rates, there's also the market. And if the market goes up and valuations increase, then the taxpayer is required to pay an increase in taxes. To give you an example, I'm working with one subdivision, mostly seniors. There's 32 units, and the combined mill rate levy is 2.2%. These homes were previously assessed at $160,000 on average, and this year, due to a couple of recent sales, abnormal sales in the market where home flippers moved in, fixed up the property, and then resold right away, they're now assessed at $248,000, which is a $98,000 increase. And at 2.2%, that's approximately $1,997 in additional property tax that each of those homeowners, mostly seniors again, are required to now pay. For each unit, that means that the local municipality is receiving quite a windfall of additional tax revenue that they have to then deal with.
Boards subject to truth in taxation that want to raise property taxes by more than 2% plus new construction have to inform taxpayers and hold a transparent public hearing process. Can you tell our listeners about the truth in taxation process, what's going to happen each September, and why they should pay attention?
So LB 103 was passed last year, and I remember you doing a nice interview with some folks from Utah to discuss where that concept had originated from. But in September, each board, subject to those requirements, will hold a public hearing, at least a budgetary workshop, to decide whether or not to accept those additional tax revenues, add them to the budget, and how to proceed from there. However, each board has a budgetary process that begins months in advance. The Papio, Missouri Natural Resource District will pass our budget in September, but in the preceding 3 months, we'll have a draft budget prepared by our staff and general manager. Each of us directors will review that budget and propose some cuts here and some budgetary realignment until we can get to an agreement in September for a vote. So truth in taxation will require us to hold an additional public hearing and to decide whether to spend that additional money or neutralize the budget and reduce our spending accordingly.
That's a good point, because unless the rate is lowered, property tax payers are going to be paying more because of valuation increases. And that's why they should care. Correct, Patrick?
That's right. Absolutely should care. That's money right out of your family budget and or your company or corporate budget. And if you don't know if you're going to be paying that, whether or not you receive a credit from the state or the municipality is going to reduce that, you're going to have to set that money aside and not spend it or invest it. So you can't risk it, risk higher returns because that money is going to be sitting there. And I call that lazy money, if you even have it. What we're finding now is many Nebraskans don't have those extra funds sitting around, and they're not paying their property taxes on time.
Yep. And property taxes are unpopular everywhere in the country, and every state has property taxes to some degree. But we pay more property tax than most, with the eighth highest rates on homeowners. So what strikes me in hearing from Nebraskans is that property taxes are an issue of great economic concern, as you just pointed out. But there's also a lot of confusion about how property taxes and property tax policies work. So is there anything unique about Nebraska's property tax situation that necessitates a process like truth and taxation, Patrick?
Well, I think the thing that makes Nebraska not necessarily unique, but challenging is we have so many municipalities confiscating property taxes. On my own tax bill, there's 11 different line items, including bonds. And to ask the average Nebraskan to pay attention to each of those municipalities, each of the elected officials that serve on those boards, the rates is simply too much. It'd be the full-time job just to even track the data, let alone the budgets or all of those personalities. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is there's not real proven guideline for these municipalities to follow. Papio, Missouri is one of the lowest line items on your property tax bill, whereas the public school districts usually receive about 64% of your total property taxes. So they may range from 3% to 0.035%. And I think Nebraskans are very confused as to how much these municipalities are actually authorized statutorily to confiscate from them.
Patrick, I know part of your tax practice is helping property taxpayers who believe the assessment process has done them wrong. Without discounting that sometimes property is assessed incorrectly and needs to be contested, merely changing some assessments doesn't change the fact that Nebraska has high property tax rates. We mentioned previously that we have the eighth highest rates in the country. So how can we use truth and taxation to get property taxpayers thinking bigger and more systemically about the problem, which affects the whole community?
Jim, I think that's a great question. And using truth and taxation, it creates a unique opportunity for Nebraska to really set some guidelines to help the municipalities better improve their processes. This is really, like I said, a two-issue problem to solve. The first is the rates and how the municipalities operate. But the second is how individual taxpayers manage their own tax obligations. I like to tell my clients that you need to treat it in a very similar fashion as you do income tax, and use that income tax period to also add your property taxes in and do some management. When you receive your initial property valuation notice in January, that's not the end of it. You receive a final valuation notice in May, and there's a lot of lag time. And in between that time, the taxpayer would have the opportunity to meet with their local county assessor to hold an informal meeting to discuss maybe an adjustment to their property valuations. But then in June, taxpayers have 30 days to appeal or protest their property valuation if they don't feel that it's correct. Now, this is an additional burden to those taxpayers. And so one thing that Nebraska might consider would be to realign these deadlines and these periods of time to better align with the normal tax season. And I think that would go a long way to help taxpayers get involved, better understand what's going on, what the processes are, and exactly what the deadlines are. In September, taxpayers will be receiving a notice of a public hearing that will be held where the municipalities meet together, and taxpayers will be given the opportunity to voice their opinions as to what maybe should be a priority for these municipalities. So that final valuation notice and your June 30th deadline to protest really isn't the final word. Each municipality will be affording taxpayers the opportunity to allow their voices to be heard again in September before those budgets are finalized.
You've been elected to a board that levies property taxes. Now, the natural resources districts are not included in the truth and taxation process because they're a pretty tiny part of the property tax issue. But do you have any advice to taxpayers about their opportunity to serve on elected boards And then a follow-up question, how does it impact your view of property taxes? And do you see a chance with truth and taxation for more leaders to step up and run for locally elected offices?
But one thing I've found, and I've always felt this to be true, is Nebraska has a wealth of talent out there. And there are many people with a servant's heart that would like to get involved. And like anything, whether it be sports or politics, I just recommend that they first attend meetings, find an issue that's maybe their hot button that they'd like to learn more about or get involved with. Attend some meetings, see how it's currently going, build a political skill set, learn how to run for office, learn how to serve on a board, understand parliamentary procedure, review the current budgets. And like I said, it's just like sports. You have to show up, you have to practice before you run. And running and winning is one thing, serving and governing is another. So it's two different skill sets. You should familiarize yourself with both, but definitely get involved and call your local official that represents you. It is definitely an eye opener. As a personal financial consultant doing taxes and insurance and other products, I've been privy to very personal information over the years, thousands of tax returns, hundreds of insurance policies, and you really gain a deep appreciation of other people's finances. So I have a deep appreciation and understanding that this money we're working with on the Papio, Missouri Natural Resource District or any elected board is not our own. And we definitely have to respect that and make sure that we steward those funds very responsibly.
How do you feel about the truth and taxation law? And what do you envision possible candidates thinking about running for office now that the truth and taxation law is on the books?
I've been an advocate for transparency for decades, and anything that gets us closer to full transparency and better public engagement, I'm all for. For other elected officials, my fellow board members, I would really like them to start thinking in terms of budget neutralization. We need to come up with a budget that works ahead of time and then be prepared to reduce our mill rate levies accordingly and budgets if economic environment affords us a windfall property tax revenue. That budget neutralization could be simply returning funds already collected back to taxpayers in the form of a credit, or simply reducing the amounts, if we have time, that we collect in the current year. Keeping in mind that two counties, Lancaster and Douglas in Nebraska, do tax in arrears, and there is a lot of work to do out there. So that's another issue. Think about getting all the counties on the same page.
All right, you've talked about looking under the hood at a lot of your clients' taxes and financial situations. What does it mean to the Nebraskans you've worked with when they don't feel like they have any control over the tax side of their budget? And how does it motivate your interest in issues like truth and taxation and tax reform in general?
I tell you how it feels. How it's been described to me is, a lot of parents out there have teenagers, and once in a while you'll have somebody in the family run up a credit card. We call that a spendthrift. Years ago, we used to have teen lines. You get your telephone bill and suddenly there's $900 in there. It's a shock. It's a shock to the family. It's an unexpected expense. Where property taxes are concerned, if you have a market like we have now, there's scarcity in the market, few products are out, few properties are available. So the demand is high and prices are going up. What we're seeing is families are getting hit with these thousands of dollars in additional tax obligations. And it's causing fear. People are having to make a choice. Do I buy my medication or do I save up to pay off the property tax? Right now, I have a client worried because she doesn't have enough money to pay the property tax and a broken hot water heater. So choices have to be made, sacrifices have to be made, and it shouldn't fall on the taxpayer's shoulder entirely. Municipalities need to be prepared to help their constituents out and definitely neutralize that to lighten that burden.
We've talked about what taxpayers ought to do to become more engaged. Maybe just as a recap, can you tell me what you're going to be doing in September once the Truth and Taxation postcard lands in your mailbox?
Well, I've learned over the years that you really need to have a continual communication with your constituents. And so ever since I ran for and was elected to the Natural Resource District, I've met with homeowner associations, I've met with church groups, anywhere that I can get in front of people to discuss how our municipality is doing for them, how their money is being spent, where it's going, contracts that we engage in with contractors, other vendors, how those contracts are decided on and voted on, our interactions with other local municipalities through joint interlocal agreements. I like to talk to people about those. I like to audit those. I like to talk to our staff and see how they feel, how the work is going, make sure that they're being safe, productive, efficient, effective in their positions. And I think word gets out. So this fall, leading up into the September period where we'll be seeing truth and taxation meetings, I'll be preparing for that and inviting some of my constituents to get involved. Many of our constituents are pretty heavy stakeholders in the community. They've got large investments, developments, business districts, and they definitely are affected by property taxes. And they have accounting and legal staff very interested to see what unfolds here. So we'll be hearing from all of them.
Well, Patrick, thank you for joining me on Nebraskanomics today. And if you'd like some help preparing for Truth and Taxation in September, you can visit platteinstitute.org/truth and sign up for our Truth and Taxation alerts. We'll be providing free resources that will empower you to have a say about your local property tax bill this year and every year. Once again, you can find free Truth and Taxation resources at platteinstitute.org/truth. Patrick, once again, thanks for helping prepare our listeners for this opportunity and for joining me on Nebraskanomics today.
Thank you, and thanks for all the Platte Institute does.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you want more economic freedom in Nebraska, please visit platteinstitute.org to make a donation to help fund our research and advocacy. Or you can subscribe to our newsletter and learn about today's most important issues facing Nebraskans. It's time to stop the status quo. Let's remove economic barriers and make Nebraskans proud.